Breaking the Silence: How Domestic Violence Disproportionately Impacts Black Women and What We Can Do About It. 3 seconds. That's how long it takes for someone in America to become a victim of domestic violence. 3 seconds. In the time it took me to say that sentence, someone's life was forever changed. I recently had the privilege of interviewing DrSandra Wright, a revolutionary force in the field of domestic violence advocacy, whose work has not only illuminated the devastating impact of domestic violence on Black women and girls, but has fundamentally transformed how we approach this crisis. Dr. Wright isn't just collecting data, she's saving lives. Her groundbreaking research and fearless advocacy have created pathways to safety for thousands of women who previously had nowhere to turn. Her insights weren't just informative, they were transformative. And today, I want to share what I learned from her because these are truths that demand to be spoken aloud. Dr. Wright's passion stems from a profound understanding that domestic violence is not just a private issue. It's a public health crisis that disproportionately impacts Black women and girls who face significantly higher rates of intimate partner violence and homicide than other groups. But she also believes in something powerful, that witnessing or experiencing domestic violence can become a catalyst for personal transformation and activism. The statistics are staggering. According to the Violence Policy Center report that Dr. Wright referenced, Black women experience homicide at nearly 3 times the rate of all women nationwide. Let that sink in for a moment. 3 times, and nearly 90% of Black female homicide victims are killed with guns. These aren't just numbers, they represent mothers, daughters, sisters, friends. They represent dreams extinguished, voices silenced, potential unrealized. They represent a societal failure so profound that we've almost become numb to it. Almost, but Dr. Wright refuses to let these statistics be the end of the story. She insists that we must break the silence around domestic violence by supporting survivors, advocating for policy change, and building networks that empower Black professionals to lead on this issue. The CDC data reveals that about 29% of Black women will experience intimate partner violence during their lifetimes. That's nearly 1 in 3. And this statistic is amplified by cultural stigma surrounding disclosure within many communities. Survivors often face barriers, including fear of not being believed or supported by law enforcement and social services. The lack of culturally competent resources compounds this trauma, creating a perfect storm where silence feels safer than speaking out. But silence has never protected us. Silence has never changed laws. Silence has never saved lives. Dr. Wright shared with me how advocacy organizations have used data to pressure lawmakers for targeted interventions, such as task forces focused specifically on missing and murdered Black women. While some states, like Minnesota, have formed such task forces with tangible results, including increased awareness and resource allocation, other states still lag behind due to legislative gridlock. She told me about Melissa, a woman from Minneapolis whose sister disappeared in 2018. For months, Melissa couldn't get police to take her concerns seriously. Missing Black women don't make headlines, an officer told her. But Melissa refused to be silenced. She organized community searches. She plastered posters across the city. She testified before the state legislature. Her persistence helped spark the creation of Minnesota's task force on missing and murdered Black women. It took decades of advocacy before policymakers began acknowledging racial disparities in victimization rates. The creation of state level commissions marks an important milestone in recognizing and beginning to address this crisis. These efforts push society toward equitable justice field, empowering survivors through visibility. But what happens when the system fails. When traditional approaches don't work, this is where grassroots innovation comes in. Organizations like the Domestic Violence Prevention Network employ restorative justice practices tailored specifically for Black survivors, including peer led healing circles to rebuild trust within families and communities. Participants report greater feelings of safety, increased willingness to seek help early on, and reduced recidivism among perpetrators who participate meaningfully in restorative programs. Dr. Wright told me about Janelle, who found herself trapped in an abusive relationship for 8 years. When she finally sought help, the traditional shelter system felt cold and institutional. I needed healing, not just housing, she said. Through a peer led circle at DVPN, Janelle found both practical support and spiritual renewal. Today, she leads circles herself, guiding other women through the journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Years spent unrecognized led activists within affected neighborhoods to design solutions rooted in shared lived experiences rather than institutional models alone. The expansion from pilot projects into citywide initiatives demonstrates scalability when programs center survivor voices from marginalized backgrounds. These restorative approaches create sustainable pathways out of cycles of harm while uplifting community resilience against systemic oppression. Dr. Wright's voice rises with urgency when she speaks about Wisconsin, where Black lawmakers have repeatedly introduced bills calling for a statewide task force on missing and murdered African American women after persistent disparities came into public view via media coverage. Despite bipartisan support at times, political resistance based on claims about prioritizing one group over another has stalled progress. Families continue waiting for answers amid bureaucratic inertia. She shared the story of Representative Shelia Stubbs, who has reintroduced this legislation year after year, refusing to let the issue die in committee. Every time we bring this bill forward, Stubbs said, we're telling these families that their daughters, their sisters, their mothers matter. Legislative champions persistently reintroduce bills. Local advocates mobilize families impacted by loss as vocal constituents demanding accountability from elected officials. While full passage remains elusive as recently as July 2023, increased media scrutiny has forced broader conversations about race specific interventions and inspired similar efforts beyond Wisconsin. The movement was sparked by grassroots organizing around unsolved cases involving young mothers and girls whose disappearances were ignored until public pressure mounted through testimony before state assemblies. Gaining bipartisan co sponsors represents incremental but significant progress toward formal recognition at the state level, even if final votes remain pending. The ongoing campaign illustrates how witnessing injustice motivates individuals and families into long term advocacy roles, capable of ultimately shifting laws and policy priorities across entire regions, not just isolated incidents. This is what Dr. Wright means when she says that witnessing or experiencing domestic violence can be a powerful catalyst for personal transformation and activism. Your story matters, and your decision to act can inspire change in your family and community. As Maya Angelou once said, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. The stories of Black women who have experienced domestic violence have gone untold for too long. And in that silence, the violence continues. But what happens when we break that silence? What happens when we speak truth to power? Change happens slowly, sometimes painfully slowly, but it happens. In our conversation, Dr. Wright challenged every listener, especially those who witnessed domestic violence firsthand, to break their silence today. whether it means reaching out privately for support or joining advocacy efforts publicly. Take one concrete step towards ending cycles of harm where you live. Dr. Wright speaks with clarity, born from lived experience. Articulate because truth deserves precision. Passionate because lives are literally at stake every day we delay action. Feisty because complacency cannot coexist with love for our babies or our future generations surviving despite adversity. She wants listeners moved, not only emotionally, but also energetically charged with hope that transformation is possible even when pain feels overwhelming, empowered knowing they're not alone, inspired fiercely enough to never again accept silence where justice demands voice. So, what can we do? How do we move from awareness to action? First, we must acknowledge the reality. Domestic violence disproportionately impacts Black women and girls. This is an opinion, it's fact backed by data. We cannot address what we refuse to name. Second, we must support survivors. This means believing them when they speak up. It means creating culturally competent resources that address the unique challenges Black women face when seeking help. It means understanding that leaving an abusive situation is not as simple as walking out the door, especially for women who may face economic insecurity, housing discrimination, or fear of law enforcement. Third, we must advocate for policy change, support legislation that addresses the specific needs of Black women experiencing domestic violence. Call your representatives, show up at town halls, make your voice heard. Fourth, we must build networks of support within our communities. Check on your friends. Create safe spaces for honest conversation. Be the person someone can turn to when they need help. And finally, we must break the silence in our own lives. If you've witnessed or experienced domestic violence, know that your story has power. Your voice matters. Your experience can help others feel less alone and can inspire action. As Dr. Wright reminds us, silence will not protect you. Those words, originally spoken by Audre Lorde, ring as true today as they did when she first uttered them. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate is not linear. It's messy and complicated and sometimes feels impossible, but it is possible. Dr. Wright has seen it happen. I've seen it happen, and it can happen for you or someone you love. Remember that statistic I shared at the beginning? 3 seconds. That's how often someone becomes a victim of domestic violence in America. But here's another number to consider: one. One person speaking up can start a movement. One person breaking the silence can inspire others to do the same. One person taking action can save lives. I stand before you today not just as a speaker, but as a witness to the power of breaking silence, a witness to the transformation that happens when we refuse to accept violence as inevitable, a witness to the courage of survivors who have turned their pain into purpose. The path forward requires each of us to examine our own silence and complicity. It requires courage to speak uncomfortable truths. But as Dr. Wright so eloquently stated, transformation is possible even when pain feels overwhelming. So I leave you with this challenge. What will you do with your voice? What silence will you break today? What action will you take tomorrow? Because in the time it took me to deliver this talk, hundreds of people became victims of domestic violence. But with your help, hundreds more can become survivors, advocates, and agents of change. The time for silence is over. The time for action is now, and it begins with you.